I'm happy to be here this morning, and I'd like to thank both Sylvia Yount for organizing the panel, and I'd also like to thank my colleague in Los Angeles, Carol Eliel, for suggesting I join the panel as not really a curator, but as a director of the Fowler Museum at UCLA. And I show you on the screen our building, which is located in the heart of the UCLA campus. And because some of you may not know about the Fowler, we're certainly not at the scale of any of the institutions that have been discussed this morning. I will say that we have a big presence on the campus. This is a building that was completed in 1992, but the museum itself was founded in 1963 in a very kind of singular manner by a visionary chancellor named Franklin Murphy, who also had a tremendous impact that sort of rippled across the city of Los Angeles in terms of arts and culture. And he himself was a great collector of what was then called primitive art and had a certain passion for learning about the world. And so in 1963, he established what we were initially called the Museum and Laboratories of Ethnic Art and Technology. Not a worse title ever for a museum, I don't think. But this was really a major policy decision on the part of the chancellor to create a research unit that could bring together anthropology, archaeology, ethnology, art history, many different disciplines. So I would say that the Fowler, which is now its name, was founded fundamentally on the idea of interdisciplinarity and boundary crossing. And from the get-go, our mission was to work with the arts of Africa, Asia, the Pacific, and Native and South America. So in our own little way, we too are an encyclopedic museum. We just leave out the sort of Euro-American piece of the picture. It still gives us plenty to do, as you all know, because many museums have in one department, under one curator, all those parts of the world. And the museum quickly changed its name, but I do want to say that those words chosen to describe the institution really foretell its future. Yes, we're a museum. Yes, we're a laboratory. We've always been about experimentation and innovation. Yes, we deal with ethnic art, or what was then called ethnic art. And yes, we deal with technology, or we delve deeply into the context, the uses, the meanings, the purposes of the arts made by cultures across the world. The second great thing that Franklin Murphy did, literally 1 year after he established the museum, was to secure a gift of 30,000 works of art from the Wellcome Trust in London, which meant that this new museum that lived in the basement of a classroom building had crate after crate after crate of great objects arriving on the scene, and I include two of these great masterpieces of our collection, this Nkisi figure from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and this headdress that comes from southeastern Nigeria, as only a couple of the treasures that arrived. Many are works of art of this caliber, and many are examples of material culture. So I would say that our collections are deep and broad, with a particular emphasis on the arts of Africa. And so as an early institution, we had to invent ourselves. There were few museums like us anywhere. We had a strong research mission. Scholarship was key. We were interdisciplinary, as I said, from the get-go. Our way of thinking about ourselves was primarily geographic, even though we had pre-Columbian sculpture as well as things that had been made really up until the recent moment. And so in the first decades, the Fowler created really new exhibition paradigms that became nationally recognized with traveling exhibitions that moved across the country. And we, as was said this morning, we really were doing exhibitions of the new and always the unfamiliar. We were drawing on new field research. We were explaining cultures that had rarely been heard of before, arts that had been little studied or little understood. And so there has always been this impulse to do something path-breaking and something fresh. And I think that part of the reason that the Fowler has become so good at what it does is because from the get-go, things were done in a collaborative, cross-departmental way. Of course, our departments were one person, so it wasn't difficult to have that degree of interaction. And we had 2 curators, we had 1 director of education, we had 1 director of exhibitions who did exhibition design. And so by its very nature, this is an institution that worked together. But always at the table in the development of exhibitions were not just the key staff who could think through how are we going to present these arts in a way that will help our audiences, both on campus and off campus, understand the richness and meanings of these art forms that are so unfamiliar. So artists sat at the table, practitioners of religions, and various other scholars and curators who could help us figure out how to do these new kinds of exhibitions. One of our most famous exhibitions was the Sacred Arts of Haitian Vodou, which was a chance to unpack the sort of mystery of Vodou and have people understand its breadth and scope and importance for the Haitian people. But the one thing that had not yet happened at the Fowler, and we became the Fowler Museum of Cultural History when we moved into our new building, was an exhibition dedicated to our permanent collections. We were so busy doing all these amazing temporary shows that little time had been given to this collection, which 10 years ago had grown to 150,000 objects from that initial 30,000, both by field collecting, by donation, by acquisition. And so when I arrived in 2001, I launched a new initiative for us to really think about a way that we could present our permanent collections so that it could become a centerpiece of teaching for K-12 kids, for teaching on the campus, and for reaching out to new communities in Los Angeles. And so we came up with an exhibition that we call Intersections, World Arts, Local Lives. And in developing this exhibition, we drew on lessons of over 40 years of work doing these kinds of special exhibitions. And we were looking for an alternative paradigm that went beyond categories, beyond geography, and beyond particular cultures to emphasize art's shared meanings and purposes. And we created instead an exhibition that was thematic and cross-cultural, and whose goal was to underscore how objects are examples of great creative achievement and innovation, as well as vehicles of learning and windows onto cultural worlds. And what you're looking at is the first thing you see when you walk into the gallery, and you're seeing 5 windows to represent those 5 key areas of collections at the Fowler, from the Pacific to Asia, to the North Coast Americas, to the Moche of Peru, to Nigeria. And those objects, as you can see, all have human faces to signal immediately that the arts on view address human concerns and challenges, and that our key point in doing this exhibition is to help people see the complex and rich and exciting ways that art builds meaning and creates purpose in people's lives across the globe. And so the name World Arts, Local Lives was really about these global trends that we can read and ways of understanding, but with some very local and very specific cultural examples. The first gallery of this exhibition, I'm not going to take you through the whole exhibition because of time, but this was our key opening salvo. This is an exhibition, or this is a gallery built around the idea of art and action, to really emphasize the point that objects do things, that objects make a difference. And you can see that wonderful inkisi on the left side of the screen. I guess that's a pointer right here that you saw earlier. And we combined this presentation of 4 key objects that had incredible importance for the cultures that produced them, that acted in ways that made a huge difference. And these are the kinds of pieces that you would easily see at an art museum in many museums across the country and the world. But what we did, I think, that was highly innovative and is really about this boundary crossing and this freedom and willingness to breach hierarchy was in the back of the gallery is a 22-foot-long case that includes multiples of Japanese baskets, Peruvian ceramics, decorated gourd bowls, betel nut cutters, all objects of daily use in a section we called Beauty and Purpose, Art That Works. And we wanted to make the important point that people make beautiful objects to elevate the experience of using those objects, and that these objects create every bit as much cultural meaning as do the highly sacred, highly ritual pieces that you see isolated in single cases. And I also think it's important to notice the bold use of color that the Fowler has in this exhibition and has been a tradition really since the beginning of creating these dynamic environments in which to show non-Western art. And then I'm ending with the final gallery of that exhibition, which was based around the theme Art and Transformation, how art facilitates all kinds of transitions, helps people deal with challenges in their lives, from going from life to death. Or in the final section of the exhibition, a section that was called Tradition is Innovation, to make the very important point that all objects, even if we categorize them as tradition-based, have always been new at one time or another. And this is just to make the point that art is always on the move. Cultures are always in transition. And so you see a piece of our Elanatsui sculpture importantly included as a perfect example of tradition as innovation, as the artist has certainly worked off his background as a weaver, or his family is a weaving family from Ghana. And then another piece in the foreground by the South African artist Johanna Segogela called Apartheid's Funeral. But the other thing that we did that's been really a wonderful addition to this exhibition, and this exhibition is in 6,400 square feet of space and has about 250 objects in it, is we created a gallery in the center that we call Fowler in Focus, and it's given us an opportunity to take out sub-collections within our collection at least 3 or 4 times a year in order to bring more art out of storage and into the galleries. Because remember, this is our one and only gallery dedicated to our permanent collections. And then I'd like to bring up one more example, speaking about the introduction of the contemporary, or in the case of the Fowler, moving from what had so solidly been a tradition-based formula for presenting arts and cultures, but always introducing elements of the new and of the moment. But we were very attracted to the work of Nick Cave. As many of you know who've seen it, the work is spectacular. It has something for everyone. The artist is completely masterful in his use of materials and his combination of both found things and bought things. The other thing that really attracted us is the way in which the artist deals with issues of identity and transformation in the creation of his sound suits. And this is the installation of Nick Cave, Meet Me at the Center of the Earth at the Seattle Art Museum, and pretty much the way it was organized initially at the Yerba Buena Art Center in San Francisco. When we did Nick Cave, this is how we installed it. And this is just one section of the exhibition. We introduced color. We grouped the objects so that they were in kind of conversational groupings. We worked directly with Nick Cave to propose another way of showing his work instead of this tradition of having them appear kind of like mannequins on a runway. And we found that the ability to turn corners to discover the work afresh was really an exciting way to represent Nick Cave's work and to connect this particular installation to the ways that we had installed arts from other places. And of course, his work with beading and glittery surfaces was an automatic reference for us to the arts of Haitian Vodou, to African masquerade. We did a major show on Carnival, worldwide Carnival, so our audiences could make connections to the work by remembering the kinds of shows that we had done in the past. But I would also say that there was some pushback about the Fowler showing Nick Cave's work in its galleries because of the difficulty we have getting away from an identity as an anthropology museum, even though I would argue we've never been an anthropology museum. We've always been an art museum, but we've always been a non-Western art museum. And one blogger, who shall remain nameless, published when she heard that the Fowler was going to do the Nick Cave show, and she said, "My quibble is with what seems a questionable location of Cave's work in terms of, in quotes, material culture, when it is really better understood in terms of contemporary artistic practice." And I think if you look at his work, you can see that his work has everything to do with material culture, everything to do with the history of things. He combines materials in his sound suits to reference their life histories. He himself likes to challenge categories between high and low, art and craft. And so it was not difficult, I don't think, for us to become the place for Nick Cave to show his work. And for those of you who know that these sound suits are meant to make sounds when they move, and of course when displayed they're entirely static, that the artist himself is as concerned with introducing movement and performance into his exhibitions as we are when we show African masquerade, interested in making sure that people see how they're danced, how they move, the music. And in order to facilitate that, he provided us with a set of sound suits with which we staged invasions across the city of Los Angeles, and were able to partner with our dance program at UCLA, and these are UCLA dance students wearing these raffia sound suits, and this was the invasion on the UCLA campus. And it was really an incredible way to take the museum outside its walls into the community. But lastly, I want to remind you how much Nick Cave is, in fact, thinking about and working from the very kinds of masquerades that we present otherwise in our exhibitions. And this is a masquerade from northeastern Nigeria that followed the Nick Cave show, and so people could, in fact, make these various connections. And I just want to end by raising the idea of audience expectation. I think it's been said before, and what kinds of challenges arise when the Fowler brings Nick Cave into its galleries when people have not been used to it, or what sort of challenges arise when the Getty decides to show the work of Tim Hawkinson, or LACMA presents in its pre-Columbian galleries an installation by Jorge Pardo. And I would maintain that breaking free of expectation, that challenging people's prescriptive notions of where something should be or not be, which is the point of this panel, really is about establishing why art is great, because it can do this. It can make us think in new ways and can make us build new connections. Thank you.
There we go. Can you hear us? Thank you all. Those were just terrific presentations, raised so many different issues and themes, but I think one of the key themes was clearly the notion of collaboration and collegial support, whether we saw it in issues of acquisitions, and Matthew's example of working with all these different departments, but the key point being starting with the director. I thought that was a very interesting point, and sharing those funds, or loans, Emily's experience working with her colleagues, And then Marla, of course, the short-term installations where you can do, so much more and kind of really break those boundaries. I think for many of us, especially at encyclopedic museums, the challenge is doing something more long-term. And I do wonder if some of that may be a response to what had been very much in vogue maybe 10 years ago, and that was the general thematic installation, which many of us came to, I think, in collaboration with educators at our museums, and coming from that notion of audience expectation and the notion that it would actually help our audiences more to engage them and think about these large themes and think about the meaning of works as opposed to the individual distinctive qualities of certain media and certain historical periods. And I'm wondering if that's something that you all are still thinking about, if that's a challenge at different institutions, and just how many institutions in our midst are still dealing with that thematic notion of this is something we want to have on an ongoing basis as opposed to those older categorizations. Those are a lot of issues. Sorry, whoever wants to jump in.
Oh, yeah. I'm happy to. We can, there are challenges to the presentation of works on paper in the new wing, which was designed by Renzo Piano, who, as many of you no doubt know, is an enormous fan of natural light. There are deleterious potential results for putting out works on paper along with work in other media. It's an interesting point because I am a fan of thematic installations when they are, I would say, historically tight, close, because I think you can learn a lot by offering contrast and dissimilarity, but paradoxically, the further apart the things are, the more pressure there is only to convey an implicit sameness or a continuity. And it's a shame because people can learn a lot by contrast as well as, like, compare and contrast is often contrast, but they don't tend to approach museum people, a general public that would come and see an installation. And so if we are able to work again doing thematic installations that are not shows, I would still like them, for me, to be more, tightly focused in a region or a moment or something.
I feel that the thematic approach that we took in our exhibition, our long-term exhibition, has really made the work far more exciting for people to think about, especially when being thematic also meant juxtaposing works from completely different places that would have had no business being together other than in the context of our galleries, that it helps people with visual thinking, it helps people understand shared issues, and while it can be challenging, I think that in the end it is more engaging and people really connect to the material by wondering about it. And that to me is always, maybe it's a part of a university